So, hello everyone. I'm hope you all are doing well. Definitely these are interesting times we're living through. Dynamic to say the least. I know I am not the only one who holds these beliefs that these times are very unprecedented. I've spoken with many people, people who are some who are over the age of 90, which is crazy to think about how long they've been around. But yeah, I've talked with them. I've asked them similar questions like, what has been the most like groundbreaking event, like historical event in the 9 decades or 8 decades or however old they are that you've been on this been on this earth. And they've said similar things like the times we're living through right now with what we're seeing is just something unlike what they've ever seen. So yeah, so definitely there are a lot of things going on. Obviously, we are still living in a global pandemic, and despite what some people might like to say, we're not near the end. We're not near the end. Even when a vaccine comes out, it's only going to be something like 70% effective, and obviously not everyone is going to take it, and the process is being politicized, so less people will trust the eventual vaccine, which is unfortunate. So still a lot of stuff to go, a lot of ways to go in getting this under control. So obviously that's going on. We also have huge calls for racial equality within our country. The Black Lives Matter movement has definitely taken the forefront and shown us the problems with systemic racism within our society and the things that we need to do as a country to address the economic and social inequality of African Americans that has occurred over the past hundreds of years. So that is huge. This kind of goes alongside this goes alongside the coronavirus pandemic, but we've seen the largest GDP shrink in our history. During the Great Depression, if you mention my podcast, I'll shout it out here. You can check it out. It's currently in my Instagram bio. Or you can just look up "Actually Making America Great" on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. It should be on all the other ones, Overcast, everything else. But if you take a look at it, the fourth episode is called "An Economy for America," where I compare our current economy to the one of the Great Depression. And during the Great Depression, our GDP shrank by 27%. In the second quarter of 2020 this year, our GDP shrank by 33%. We had a larger economic downturn in the second quarter of 2020 than we did during the Great Depression. That is how unprecedented this is. It is phenomenal how much things have taken a turn in 2020. So, and on top of that, which is what the segment today will most be focused on, is the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Phenomenal Supreme Court justice. She worked her entire career to basically eliminate a lot of gender-based stereotyping and legislation, as well as many regulations. She was appointed as Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, United States Supreme Court, by Bill Clinton in 1993. Whether or not you like Bill Clinton, obviously I'm not a huge fan of Bill Clinton, but this was a very good decision. Probably one of his best decisions was to put Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the Supreme Court. So, and as we know, it is very unprecedented. She was the second woman, other than Sandra Day O'Connor, to sit on the Supreme Court in its 212-year history. She was the second woman. So we're going to be talking about a lot of the implications of that, but I don't want the implications that we speak of to overshadow the amazing career and just phenomenal things that this person did for our country. So whether or not you like the decision she made, a lot of respect needs to go out to her. So with regards to that, let's move on to a little bit of these implications. So if you're not aware, Trump and Mitch McConnell have now made it very clear that they will be trying in these 45 days before election to push a Supreme Court nominee through and get them confirmed. This is quite laughable considering their positions in the past. If you're unaware, in President Obama's last year of presidency in 2016, Antonin Scalia unfortunately passed away. And Obama, in March, because Scalia died in February. In March, Obama appointed Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court, and basically Merrick Garland, well-qualified judge. He had been verified by many different groups that he was very qualified to be on the court. Mitch McConnell, as well as many other people, as you'll see in a video in a second, Lindsey Graham, McConnell issued a statement that they would not consider any nominee put forward by Obama, and that a Supreme Court nomination should be left to the next president of the United States. So let's think about that. That was in March. We're currently in almost the end of September. The election is less then around 6 weeks away. It's around 6 weeks away. And in 45 days, they want to push someone through. Mind you, the Kavanaugh hearing took about 57 days, so this is already going to be tried to be pushed even further, but they're also just completely contradicting themselves. But yet again, are we really expecting anything less? So, yeah, this is huge, and I think we should watch a video. There's one about Lindsey Graham, and he was speaking on the Merrick Garland situation, and, well, let's say he kind of screwed himself over here. So let's bring this down. And we shall take a look at what Lindsey Graham had to say about this entire situation. So let's hear this. All right, let's go.
This is the last year of a lame duck president. And if Ted Cruz or Donald Trump get to be president, they've all asked us not to confirm or take up a selection by President Obama. So if a vacancy occurs in their last year of their first term, guess what? You will use their words against them. I want you to use my words against me. If there's a Republican president in 2016 and a vacancy occurs in the last year of the first term, you can say, Lindsey Graham said, let's let the next president, whoever it might be, make that nomination, and you could use my words against me, and you'd be absolutely right.
Well, all right. That's pretty damning in itself if we look at that. So let's bring this back up and we'll talk about that. I mean, what is there really to talk about? Like, Lindsey Graham specifically said that if there was a Supreme Court vacancy in the last year of the next president's term, that it should be left to the next president. Like, but you know, Lindsey Graham isn't someone who sticks to his word. So I don't really think that nothing's going to happen with that. So yeah, that is very telling that obviously they're not, sticking to their word, but what's new? Not many politicians do. So there's a lot more implications that come along with the unfortunate passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the possible filling of that seat by most likely a more conservative judge, obviously a more conservative person. If they try to rush it through, it's actually interesting. It's funny that they're trying to rush the nomination through because this shows that Trump and McConnell and Republicans in the Senate are not confident that Trump will win re-election. Like he has messed up this entire, COVID-19 pandemic, race relations, things of the sort, calling our military and veterans suckers and losers. Like, I'm sorry, the fact that he is still in office, the fact that he got elected astonishes me every day. It's this whole philosophy: if you lie once, it's the end of the world, but if you lie 10,000 times, no one seems to care. So we've been desensitized to that, but that is definitely, it's very telling that they're choosing to do that. But yeah, so there's interesting things to consider involving the implications involving Ruth Bader Ginsburg. One are the weight she held on the court. There are many decisions in the past 10 years and so that have been decided as a 5-4 decision, meaning the court split, and Ginsburg's vote was very, very crucial. Some of those cases, one of them was a 5-4 decision called Oberville versus Hodges, and this was the case that legalized same-sex marriage. This was the case that gave gay people the right to marry, equal protection under the 14th Amendment. This is the case that gave it. It was a 5-4 decision. Ginsburg was one of the votes in favor because there is a 5-4 conservative majority on the court currently. If Ginsburg, obviously, unfortunately passed, and they put a Republican or a more conservative person on there, that becomes a 6-3 majority. It would be a 5-4 decision the other way. We could possibly see in 2020 same-sex couples not being able to marry, not having the same rights. That's how groundbreaking this is. Something as simple as gay marriage, which I thought in 2020 was not universally, obviously there's still a lot of people, but at least under the law, I thought we had passed a road mark. No. That's the thing. We're not. We think we've progressed so far, but really, this is going to lead to a lot of regression. So, what else? What else was 5-4 decisions? Another thing along the same vein, the United States versus Windsor. basically declared that the Defense of Marriage Act was unconstitutional. Again, not granting same-sex couples the right to marry. This was in line with there was a lesbian couple who ended up getting divorced, and or at least they said that they couldn't get divorced because they technically were never married due to the Defense of Marriage Act, and therefore had to pay a lot of fees that they otherwise would be exempt of if they had marital status. So Supreme Court 5-4 decision declared that they had equal marriage rights, and 5-4 decision, Ginsburg had a key role. That gets replaced. It could be easily a 5-4 decision the other way. So, or even even a 6-3 decision, because one person, which is usually John Roberts, is the swing vote. So he's usually more conservative, but occasionally he'll come over and vote the other way. So there's that. Then there is the Department of Commerce versus New York. This is a very groundbreaking case. This was one during the 2020, for the 2020 census. Basically, President Trump wanted to put a citizenship question on the census. Why would you want to put a citizenship question on the census? Well, maybe it's because that if there's a citizenship question on the census, those who are currently undocumented will be less likely to fill out the census. And since people who are undocumented are most likely tend to, end up, if they get citizenship, vote blue, it would give less proportional representation to those who would most likely vote blue. Therefore, if less people who vote Democrat fill out the census, then Republicans, in a sense, would be able to get more representatives when they do the census, more proportional representation in the House of Representatives. So this is a purely political move to try to silence the voices of, those potentially undocumented people who could possibly gain citizenship in the future. So that is a huge one. There's one last case that we're going to talk about in the last 10 years, and that's the Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, versus Regents of the University of California. This was the groundbreaking case that defended DACA. If you're not sure what DACA is the Deferred Action of Childhood Arrivals, a policy put in place by President Obama that basically said that if you were brought here by your parents under the age of 16, the language was under no fault of your own where you're brought here, you could have a path towards legal citizenship. Basically, we were saying that these people who came to America's their home. They don't, it's not like they know their old home. They were brought here very young, would have a pathway towards citizenship, because we realized as the people started going to college, they couldn't get a lot of the same protections that American citizens do because they weren't citizens. And then once they got all the way there, they had gone through all of school, they had gotten up to this point, worked hard, been good members of the society. They, unfortunately, were not given the same protection. So this was implemented by Obama. Trump has been trying to repeal it, but it was upheld by the Supreme Court in, you guessed it, a 5-4 majority. With Ginsburg gone, and if Trump gets reelected, okay, then we're screwed. I'm sorry. Absolutely. A conservative person would get on the court. 6-3 majority. This would most likely get overturned. So, in summary, the decisions in the last 10 years that are at risk are Obergefell versus Hodges, which legalized same-sex marriage; United States versus Windsor, which is in that vein, declared the Defense of Marriage Act unconstitutional, could get put back into place. There could be a citizenship question on the next census, which disincentivizes undocumented people from filling out the census and thus not getting proportional representation. And then DHS versus Regents of the University of California, DACA could get overturned. All 4 of those could get overturned. And there's another big one that could get overturned. The next case is not one that's happened in the last 10 years. It's a very controversial one. It's one that's seen a lot of scrutiny. It's one that I'm sure most people who know basics about American history know about, and that's Roe versus Wade. If you're not sure, I'm sure most of you who are listening, if you don't, Roe versus Wade is what legalized and declared that a woman has a constitutional right to an abortion. There's been a large movement to overturn that. So far, it has been held on by a thread, and that's because John Roberts, even though he's conservative, has stood in defense of the right to an abortion and struck down any state laws that make it harder for women to get abortions. All of those decisions go on 5-4 lines, meaning that if Ginsburg is gone and a conservative is on there, Roberts can't save the court. It would most likely go 5-4 the other way. So, yeah. Oh yeah, I have no doubt that if a another conservative, and it's a 6-3 majority gets on, Roe v. Wade is done. If you are a woman in this country, the right to your own bodily autonomy is under threat. The right to being able to control your own bodily processes, what happens, whether or not you have a human growing inside of you, which is the most personal of decisions, is under attack. So think about that when it comes to this election. I'm not going to get into a whole abortion discussion right now, but this is groundbreaking. This is groundbreaking. So let's talk about Donald Trump's short list of people who he's considering to nominate to the Supreme Court, obviously, because, as one does a couple hours after someone dies, they, talk about who they're going to nominate, because, that's what we do. Okay, so the short list. Ooh, this list is kind of gross. Ted Cruz. Oh, if you know who Ted Cruz is, let's talk about that. Obviously, Ted Cruz is very conservative. Not only with that, he is against abortion and same-sex marriage. So, putting him on the court, he's also fairly young. I don't remember exactly how old he is. I think he's in his 50s or 60s. So he'd be on the court for 40, 35 years, the longest. These have long-term effects. So he opposes same-sex marriage and civil unions. He believes that marriage should be legally defined as between one man and one woman, but believes that legality of same-sex marriage should be left to each state. So this would go back to the states, and there would be certain states that would deny LGBTQ citizens, gay citizens, the same equal protection rights as others, which is, we'd be going back to it. And let's move on to Roe versus Wade. Cruz referred to the Supreme Court's decision legalizing same-sex marriage. And if we go back to abortion, he's strongly anti-abortion, would allow the procedure only when pregnancy endangers the mother's life. Might I mind you, bad logic. I don't want to get into a huge abortion discussion, but technically pregnancy always endangers the life of the mother. If you don't know, childbirth and pregnancy is a life-threatening process. Thank you. Glad you support. He's also in favor of cutting federal funding to Planned Parenthood. This drives me crazy. I'm going to go through this now because I literally cannot stand people who do this. If you do not know, there is something called the Hyde Amendment. The Hyde Amendment currently prohibits federal funding from going towards abortions, meaning your taxpayer dollars do not fund abortions. This means women, and I actually don't agree with this, I fundamentally oppose the Hyde Amendment, but the Hyde Amendment currently states that women have to pay out of pocket what they pay for an abortion. $400, $500, $600, as much as that may be. They have to pay for it. You don't pay for it. So when you cut funding to Planned Parenthood, the only thing you are cutting is women's reproductive care, pap smears, cervical cancer exams, mammograms, access to free and low-cost contraceptives. This is the stuff you're cutting. I am literally convinced that if you still want to defund Planned Parenthood when the Hyde Amendment is in place, you have some personal vendetta against women. Because it makes absolutely no sense why you would want to strip women, millions of women, from their reproductive care when there is no connection to abortion whatsoever at all. They are separate. Not only does Planned Parenthood, a main part of their thing is not abortions, like the pro-life movement likes to push. They're not this baby-killing machine. They offer pregnancy referral and many other things to help low-income women in particular. But no federal funding they get from the government can go towards abortions. So you are not paying for abortions. You're paying for low-cost contraceptives and sometimes free contraceptives for women who need it. Free cervical exams so that women don't actually have cancer and die. So much for, pro-life, I guess, but there's that. Literally defunding Planned Parenthood is quite possibly one of the stupidest ideas I have ever heard with the Hyde Amendment in place. You are literally doing nothing. So either it stems from ignorance or willful bias against women. I charitably assume ignorance, so I hope you now understand why defunding Planned Parenthood, no matter where you are on the political spectrum and wherever you stand on abortion, is fundamentally incoherent. But okay, let's move on. So I was talking a little bit about Cruz and same-sex marriage. This is scary. This quote exactly is scary. Cruz referred to the Supreme Court's decision legalizing same-sex marriage nationwide as among the darkest hours of our nation and accused the court of judicial activism. Cruz referred to the Supreme Court's decision to grant equality to same-sex couples as among the darkest hours of our nation. This is one of the people who is in position to be on the Supreme Court of the United States for the possibly next 35, 40 years. Think about that. Like, I'm speechless. These are the implications that we have. If you are gay in this country, you may not be able to marry the person that you want to marry because of this. Because of this election and because if they rush someone through. So that's one person. Unfortunately, they seem to be all in this light. So let's move on to the next person. All right. Tom Cotton, again, Republican senator. Interesting, all these people are senators. None of them are actually judges. Unlike, Merrick Garland, who was like a respected federal judge who had a lot of experience and was vetted. Regardless, I mean, what? If we have an unqualified president, what makes you think he'll pick qualified Supreme Court justices? But whatever. All right, Tom Cotton, Republican senator from Arkansas. When it comes to abortion, he has stated that Roe versus Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey, the subsequent case, were wrongly decided as a constitutional matter. So he's against it, would overturn Roe versus Wade. So in 2012, Cotton said that strong families also depend on strong marriages. What a homophobic piece of... I'm trying not to swear, by the way, so you can fill in the blank there. Yeah, imagine thinking that, like, gay couples can't have strong marriages. Like, okay, I'm not going to say that. But yeah, he's a POS. And he says he supports the traditional understanding of marriage as the union of one man and one woman, and he also supports the Defense of Marriage Act. So there goes Windsor, the United States versus Windsor, as well as Roe versus Wade, and possibly even Obergefell versus Hodges, if he gets in there. So there's that. That's one of them. And we're on to our last one. His name is Josh Hawley. Oh, by the way, if we go back to Tom Cotton, he's around the same age as Cruz, so 35, 40 years. These are young people. But if we want to talk about young, let's talk about Josh Hawley, the youngest senator in the United States. He's a Republican senator from Missouri. He's 40 years old. 40. If he gets on the bench, he could be on there as long as 50 years. Like, think about that. The implications of this are 50 years down the road. So let's talk about that. In December of 2015, Hawley supported exemptions for Missouri's business and religious groups from participating in same-sex marriage ceremonies. Religious? Sure, I understand. I agree, you should never force a church to marry a gay couple. I think it's whatever. Religious freedom, I get it. I don't agree with it, but that's how that goes. But businesses, no. I'm sorry. Businesses cannot discriminate against something based on unchangeable factors. So there we go. So he's against that, and so he supports the traditional definition of marriage. So there's those cases. And in June 2020, so this year, after the Supreme Court ruled that federal law prohibits workplace discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity, Hawley harshly criticized the decision, stating it represents the end of the conservative legal movement. I feel like you should have like the little Dicky song where it's like there's like a trend. I remember for a while I was like, yeah, that's like the whole point. Like, I think we should play that. Like, yeah, that's kind of the point. If the conservative legal movement is discriminatory against people based on their sexual orientation or gender identity, hell yeah, it should represent the end of that movement. Like, yeah, that's kind of the point. But regardless, all right. So if we go on to abortion for Hawley, he opposes abortion and calls for the appointment of constitutionalist pro-life judges. Oh, that's kind of ironic. Constitutionalist and pro-life. I thought in the Constitution it says that abortion is a woman's right. Oh, well, apparently not, because we don't follow logic there. But yeah, so apparently constitutionalist pro-life judges to the U.S. Supreme Court and other federal courts. He has called Roe versus Wade one of the most unjust decisions in American judicial history. Missouri's Right to Life PAC, Political Action Committee, endorsed Hawley for Senate. In July 2020, Hawley said he would not support any Supreme Court nominee who did not explicitly say they would vote to overturn Roe versus Wade. So clearly, he would vote. Any of these people who get on the docket, bye-bye. This is huge. Just in a recap, if we want to go over some of the things that will change if another conservative is put on the Supreme Court. The right of gay people to marry in this country is on the line. Something in 2020 that I thought that should not be a question. Equal protection for LGBTQ citizens in the workplace and outside is on the docket. A woman's fundamental right to control what occurs in her own body bodily autonomy. We never, and I'm not going to get into a long discussion, but we never allowed the government to force you to do something with your body, even if it can save someone else's life. Examples are organ donation, or if you even cause someone to be hurt. So that's why this election is so crucial. This election will determine how our nation operates for the next century, if not longer. This election is so crucial. The appointment of another conservative justice on the Supreme Court would lead to the fundamental rights of millions of Americans being stripped away. Right to marry, right to bodily autonomy, right to workplace protections for many people, as the court has opposed or upheld in 5-4 decisions. So take with this what you will. I appreciate you watching, and feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments down below. But this is sure a time of history we're living through. We're going to look back on this. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. We will look back on this in 40 years, 50 years, and say, wow, I lived through that time. I lived through, seeing, gay people get the right to marry. And I'm praying this isn't the case, but maybe we'll see it get reversed. We'll see a whole regression of our society. We've seen a lot of progression, and we think this is the norm. But unfortunately, it's not. It's not as normal as we'd like to think. So thank you all for watching, and hope you all have a great day.